I moved into Pinecrest Apartments in late spring. It wasn't the nicest building in the city, but the rent was cheap, and it was close enough to my job that I could walk. The building had a strange charm: old brick walls, creaky wooden staircases, and narrow hallways that smelled faintly of paint and dust. The landlord, Mr. Colburn, was in his 60s, always wearing a baseball cap and carrying a ring of keys that jingled with every step. On the day I moved in, I noticed a woman watching me from the doorway across the hall. She was pale, with long black hair that hung straight over her shoulders, wearing a faded gray sweater even though it was warm outside. She didn't smile. She didn't even blink much, just stared. "Don't mind her," Mr. Colburn had whispered when he saw me glance in her direction. "That's Mrs. Halvorson. She's quiet, keeps to herself." I nodded, trying not to be rude, but something about the way she watched me made my stomach twist. The first week went by quietly. I saw Mrs. Halvorson maybe twice, once coming up the stairs with a paper bag of groceries, and once standing in the hallway at night, as if she'd just stepped outside her door for air. The weird part was that both times she was staring directly at my apartment door, not at me, not at anything else, just my door. One night, around 11:30, I was woken by a faint tapping. At first, I thought it was a branch hitting my window, but my apartment faced the parking lot, not any trees. The sound kept going, tap, tap, tap. I got up, walked to the door, and looked through the peephole. She was there. Mrs. Halvorson stood in the hallway, inches from my door, her head tilted to one side. Her eyes were open wide, and she was whispering something I couldn't make out. "Mrs. Halvorson?" I said, my voice cracking slightly. The tapping stopped. She didn't move for a few seconds, then slowly walked back into her apartment and closed the door without a word. I told myself she was probably harmless, maybe just lonely or confused. But the following nights got stranger. I started hearing footsteps pacing outside my door around midnight. Sometimes I'd see shadows under the crack, moving back and forth. Once, I even heard my doorknob jiggle softly. I called the landlord about it, but he brushed it off. "She's lived here for years," Mr. Colburn said. "Bit odd, sure, but she wouldn't hurt a fly." That weekend, I came home from work to find an envelope on my doormat. Inside was a piece of paper with a single sentence, written in neat, block letters. "I can hear you breathing at night." I stood frozen in the hallway, my heart pounding. I looked toward Mrs. Halvorson's door, closed, silent. 2 nights later, I woke again to the tapping. This time, it wasn't on the door, it was on my bedroom window. I lived on the 3rd floor. No balcony, no fire escape. I slowly approached the window, my hands shaking. When I pulled the curtain back, there was nothing but darkness outside. No one there. But when I looked down at the glass, I saw them, 2 clear, wet handprints. From the outside. The final night I saw her was during a storm. Rain hammered the windows, and the power had gone out in the building. I lit a candle in my living room and tried to distract myself with a book, but the hallway outside was too quiet. No footsteps. No tapping. Then a loud bang echoed from the hallway, like someone had slammed into my door. I grabbed my phone, turned on the flashlight, and looked through the peephole. Mrs. Halvorson stood there, but she looked different. Her clothes were soaked, and her skin was almost gray, her lips trembling as she whispered, "Let me in, please, they're coming." Before I could react, she turned her head sharply toward the far end of the hall, as if she heard something approaching. And then she was gone. Not walked away, just gone. The next morning, I knocked on the landlord's office door and asked about her. "Mrs. Halvorson?" he said, blinking. "She hasn't lived here in over 20 years. I thought he was joking, but he pulled out an old, dusty folder from his desk and slid it toward me. Inside was a faded newspaper clipping. "Woman found dead in Pinecrest Apartments hallway." The picture showed her. Same sweater. Same black hair. The article said she'd been found outside her own door late one stormy night, as if she'd been running from something. No one was ever arrested. I moved out the same week. I grew up in a small, quiet town in Ohio, where everyone knew each other by name and most houses had been standing for decades. My family had lived in the same 2-story brick home since before I was born. It sat across the street from a weathered, gray house with peeling paint and a slanted roof that always looked like it might cave in at any moment. For as long as I could remember, an older man named Mr. Halpern lived there. He wasn't unfriendly exactly, but there was something unsettling about him. He never smiled, never waved back when neighbors tried to be polite. His eyes always seemed to follow people for a second too long. Even as a kid, I remember crossing the street whenever I had to walk past his front yard. The first time I really noticed him was when I was about 12. I was out front, shooting hoops in the driveway on a Saturday afternoon. The air was crisp, the kind of early spring day when you can smell freshly cut grass from 2 blocks away. As I bent down to grab the ball after it rolled toward the street, I glanced up and saw Mr. Halpern standing perfectly still in his upstairs window. He wasn't leaning against the frame or looking distracted. He was just standing there, staring directly at me. I froze. It wasn't the kind of casual glance a neighbor might give when looking outside. His face was blank, his posture stiff, and his eyes never moved from mine. I quickly grabbed the ball and went back inside, trying to shake it off. Maybe he was just zoning out. Maybe he was looking past me at something else. But over the next few weeks, I realized it wasn't a one-time thing. Every time I went outside, whether it was to get the mail, water the garden, or play basketball again, there he was in that same upstairs window watching, never blinking, never moving. One evening, about a month later, my mom sent me to drop off a container of soup at our neighbor Mrs. Carter's house, which was right next to Mr. Halpern's. It was late, the sun had already set, and the streetlights were just flickering on. I walked quickly, keeping my eyes on the cracked sidewalk in front of me. Halfway there, I made the mistake of glancing up at Halpern's house. This time, he wasn't in the upstairs window. He was standing in the doorway. The door was wide open, and he was just there, in complete darkness. I could barely make out his face, but his silhouette was unmistakable, tall, thin, his head slightly tilted like he was studying me. I walked faster, my pulse pounding. I didn't hear him move, but as I stepped onto Mrs. Carter's porch, I felt that cold, prickling sensation on the back of my neck that told me he was still watching. Things got worse that summer. Sometimes, late at night, I would wake up and see a faint light in his upstairs window. If I looked long enough, I could see his shadow pass in front of it, slow, deliberate movements, as if he was pacing the room. Other times, I could swear I heard noises coming from his yard. Not animal noises, but soft human sounds, like someone talking to themselves in a low voice. Once, when I pressed my ear to my bedroom window screen, I could make out fragments of words. Watching, waiting soon. The incident that finally pushed me over the edge happened in August. It was nearly midnight, and I was lying in bed, scrolling through my phone. My curtains were slightly open, and out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement outside. I turned my head, and there he was. Mr. Halpern was standing across the street, directly in front of my house, in the middle of the road. He wasn't looking at the house, though. He was looking straight into my bedroom window. We just stared at each other for what felt like an eternity. My heart was pounding so hard I thought I might faint. Slowly, without breaking eye contact, he lifted one hand and made a small, twitching wave. That was it. I scrambled out of bed, ran into my parents' room, and woke them up. My dad stormed outside, but by the time he got to the street, Halpern was gone. No sound of footsteps. No sign of where he went. The police came the next day, but there wasn't much they could do. They said he hadn't technically broken any laws. 2 weeks later, we woke up to find his house completely empty. The front door was wide open, the windows bare, and every single piece of furniture was gone. There was no for sale sign, no moving truck the night before. It was like he had simply vanished. But here's the part that keeps me up at night. A few days later, we found something in our mailbox. It was a single photograph of me, taken from outside my bedroom window. On the back, in shaky handwriting, were the words, "I like watching you sleep." "5 years ago, my next-door neighbor, Charles, though everyone called him Charlie, lost his 14-year-old son, Daniel. One day, Daniel was simply gone. Charlie had called the police, reporters showed up, and the whole neighborhood buzzed with fear for weeks. There were search parties combing the woods, missing person flyers on every streetlight, and late-night news updates. My wife and I had only known the family in passing, but we felt awful for them. We brought over meals a few times during those early days, but as the years went by, we stopped asking questions. The police never made an arrest, and there was never any sign of Daniel, not even a body. Charlie and his wife, Kathy, didn't seem like the same people anymore. Kathy grew pale and thin, always looking like she'd just been crying. Charlie, on the other hand, became more fidgety. His eyes darted when you spoke to him, his hands always in motion, tapping, twisting, or folding whatever was in his grasp. Even so, they tried to keep up a friendly appearance. Some summers, they'd invite us over for a barbecue, though the conversations always felt forced. I never once heard them mention Daniel's name. Then last month, something happened that's been gnawing at me ever since. It was a Tuesday evening just past sunset. I was dragging my garbage cans to the curb when I saw Charlie standing on the sidewalk near my driveway. He startled me. He'd been so quiet that I didn't hear him approach. "Hey Tim," he said, smiling faintly. "You still have that heavy-duty shovel you use for the garden?" "Yeah," I said. "You need it?" "If you don't mind," he replied quickly, glancing toward his backyard. "Just for a bit of work out back. Shouldn't need it more than a day." "Sure," I said, heading into my garage. I grabbed the big steel-bladed one, the one I use for tough roots, and handed it over. His hands trembled slightly as he took it. He thanked me and walked straight into his backyard without another word. An hour later, I was upstairs in my study when I happened to glance out the window that overlooked his yard. In the dim light of his lone back porch bulb, I saw him digging, not a small garden trench, but a deep, rectangular hole. He was working hard, pausing often to wipe sweat from his forehead. At first, I assumed he was installing something, maybe a pond or new post foundation. But then I noticed he kept looking around, scanning the fences and the neighboring windows. After a while, I thought about offering to help. I grabbed my second shovel and went out through my side gate. When I called his name, he froze mid-swing of the shovel. He slowly turned toward me, his face pale and strained, his breathing heavy. "No," he said sharply. "No, Tim. I've got it. It's no big deal," I said, walking a few steps closer. "Two people can." He cut me off. I said, "I've got it." Then, more firmly, "You can't use that shovel in my yard." The way he said it, it wasn't a request. It was a warning. His eyes locked onto mine with an intensity I'd never seen from him before. He pointed toward my gate like I was trespassing. Feeling awkward, I muttered, "All right," and left. But my curiosity had ignited. Later, when the house was quiet and my wife had gone to bed, I kept glancing out my study window. By then, Charlie had stopped digging and disappeared into his house. I figured that was the end of it, until, at around 1:15 a.m., I heard the faint metallic thud of a shovel hitting earth. I crept to the window and peered out, but his porch light was off and the darkness was thick. So I went outside. The night was cool, the only sound the soft scrape of metal against dirt. I eased over to the fence and carefully looked over. Charlie was still digging. His movements were slower now, almost deliberate, like he was being careful not to damage something buried there. When he finally stopped, he crouched down into the hole and reached for something. Then he stood, bent over, and placed something at his feet. It was impossible to tell what in the dark. After a moment, he went inside, leaving the shovel leaning against the fence. My pulse was pounding. Against my better judgment, I slipped through my side gate, crossed the small strip of grass, and approached the hole. The dirt walls were jagged, and at the bottom, lit faintly by the moon, was a black plastic bag. The corner of it had torn slightly, revealing what looked like fabric, a faded blue, patterned with something that looked like stars. It reminded me horribly of an old hoodie I'd once seen Daniel wearing. I felt my stomach twist. Then I heard a door open behind me. I scrambled back toward my own yard, my shoes slipping in the loose dirt. I barely made it through the gate before I heard Charlie's footsteps on the grass. The next morning, the hole was filled in. Charlie's SUV, usually parked neatly in the driveway, was now on the street. My shovel was gone. He hasn't spoken to me since. But yesterday, I was in my study again and glanced out, only to see him standing at his upstairs window, staring directly into mine. When our eyes met, he didn't flinch. He just reached up and slowly closed the blinds. Thank you for listening to tonight's stories. If you enjoyed, please like, share, and subscribe so you don't miss the next ones. And remember, not every shadow is empty. and not every voice in the dark is in your head. Good night and stay safe.